welcome. You guys are the real conference troopers here. You're not going to be dissuaded from a 9:15 panel on the day after Bomba Fantástica Revolución. All right. So the panel on how cooperative developers support resilient communities. And we have a very esteemed panel here of amazing folks. On my far left is Charity Schmidt, who's a cooperative developer at the Madison Development Cooperative Coalition, something like that. Okay. And also, of course, a board member of ACE. Next is Bijive Bagay from Cooperative Catalyst in New Mexico. And then I'm going sort of left to, well, I guess it's right to left for you guys, left, right for me. Adrian Roman from the Boston Center for Community Ownership. Sama Israel from New Orleans, Cooperation New Orleans, and is the outreach and engagement coordinator there. And Alex Stone, who's executive director of CooperationWorks. And I'm mostly going to stay out of this. I'll help field. There should be time for questions at the end, and I'll help field those. And I will pass the microphone or baton to Alex, and I'll let you go from there.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Steve. Wow. I don't usually hear my voice on a microphone, so this is a new experience. Yeah, so this panel started thinking about, especially the last few years, which we know have been really challenging for a lot of people in so many ways for reasons I probably don't need to get into too much. So this started because at the beginning of the pandemic, CW and many of our members took steps to really ensure that cooperatives in their community would be able to survive, like something that none of us had really experienced up until that point. So CW organized office hours where co-ops could call in and talk with an experienced co-op developer, asking any question they needed for free. We had members who were offering business, like crisis business planning services, pro bono. And we had members who were helping co-ops fill out their EIDL, the Emergency Economic Injury Disaster Loan, and the Paycheck Protection Program loan forms that would actually help keep businesses afloat. So thinking through all of those times, we already know that cooperatives tend to be more resilient than traditionally owned businesses. They weather economic downturns better. They tend to preserve more jobs. They tend to have longer survival rates. So I started thinking about the role of cooperative developers who are members of CooperationWorks and beyond, and their role in supporting these resilient communities. So we got these lovely folks together who have practiced cooperative development all over the country. And as we got talking, it actually ended up taking many long and winding roads. So we'll see the tapestry that's actually woven here today. But I'm going to let each panelist introduce themselves and their work a bit before we dive into questions. So we'll start with Tama.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm grateful that you're here even after the long night of dancing. We all kind of did our thing. My name is Tama Yisrael, and I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana. Cooperation New Orleans. I am the education and outreach coordinator there. I do a few things, especially with cooperatives in New Orleans. I'm also on the board of CooperationWorks, working with the New Orleans Food Co-op, Colluminate, and a bookkeeping co-op called Resolve. So I see cooperatives as a way for us to actually build a more equitable society and help people actually meet their needs in communities. So I'll keep my introduction a little short because I got a lot to say in the questions. So, Adrian.
Hello, good morning. My name is Adrian Roman. I'm with the Boston Center for Community Ownership, and I'm a co-op organizer there, and we do different tasks in Boston as well as North Shore, South Shore, Western Mass. We do technical assistance in launching cooperatives as well as existing cooperatives in need of support. We also do some ecosystem assessment type work in the surrounding cities and education to the public and youth entrepreneurship workshops. So we do an array of things. I'm following your lead in the, like my personal interest in cooperatives is this shift from the individual mindset to a cooperative mindset, and what that shift really means, what it really means to be an owner or to be making decisions as a group. And so that's my particular focus. And so I do that through team building, communication, and different structural practices for how you can cultivate an environment of cooperativism. Check.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me? Okay, testing it. Yeah, it's Ash Kado Shidina, Biji Bobby Gay and Nishia Shastina and Nishle. Glazishana Bushes Chinway till Dasha Chet, Hitni Dashanella, Sekombakodishia Ho A. I am the executive director of Cooperative Catalyst. We were the Cooperative Catalyst of New Mexico, but we dropped the of New Mexico because we've expanded our service area. We're working a lot with indigenous communities, and we thought it was important to remove that state aspect of it. So I am by blood, my mother is Tuscarora of New York. My father is Navajo, and I'm an enrolled member of the Navajo Nation. I was born and raised on the Navajo Nation, and I like to say that I was born into cooperation. You know, my community is very traditional, and that's where I currently reside and live and plan to for the foreseeable future. And with that, I think I'm just I'll pass it, because as Tomas said, we've got a lot to delve into with the questions, so yeah.
Hi, Charity Schmidt. I'm cooperative developer at the University of Wisconsin Center for Cooperatives, and I direct an initiative called the Madison Cooperative Development Coalition. I use the word developer, and I feel weird about using that word because I think it's really just about organizing. I come from a background of worker organizing, be it through unions and other forms, so I'd rather stick with that term. But I'm really excited to be here, and I'll keep it short as well, Toma.
All right, well, thanks so much for those introductions. As they've indicated, we may be taking some wild turns on our responses to these questions today, so we'll jump right in, sticking somewhat close to the script. So how do each of you see your roles as cooperative developers in supporting your communities to meet their needs? And did your experience of that role change at all throughout the pandemic? And we'll just, for this question, start again with Hama and go down the line.
Yeah, I think Charity set this question up pretty nicely by naming that the term developer is kind of, I say that with a little context of understanding. I first started as a community organizer, right? For me, the work has been rooted in community from the beginning and working with the people to help meet needs. I started out working with community by doing a community center space, and from there I saw where folks were needing to actually get technical skills, different works, et cetera. And so I actually don't want to say that I'm a developer. I want to say that I'm a cooperative organizer. And I saw cooperatives as a way to help people meet those needs, help people actually leverage collective resources, the few resources that we had available to us. And the one thing I want to say about what happened in the pandemic, it really resonated and lifted out the thing that already existed, especially in Black and brown communities, the global majority communities. It really lifted out that this marginalization of the economy and the isolation of resources were very prevalent. So in New Orleans, we have a relatively underdeveloped cooperative ecosystem. And so what was happening is people and communities were out of work. People needed to actually meet their needs. So we were looking at ways to actually do co-ops as a way to replenish that. And we were already talking about that prior to the pandemic, but what really resonated was things were closing. New Orleans is a restaurant-based city, tourism-based industry, so when the pandemic happened, everything shut down. everything shut down. So we really had to figure out ways, one, can co-ops actually bring some of these businesses back to life? And one of the things we found out is that people were looking, individual business owners found it really a struggle to do and keep their businesses open. And so cooperatives was a way for folks to kind of redirect how my business can maintain and meet those needs. One instance I can name is Pagoda Cafe in New Orleans, which is now a worker-owned co-op through our support. The business owner decided she was going to open back up because she heard about worker-owned co-ops through our advocacy efforts that was already happening in New Orleans. And so they not only reopened, found the money, like the EIDL funds and all of the actual funds to stay open, they used those dollars and those resources to actually give back in community. So what they were able to do is get people who were there employed back to work. They were able to use extra funding that was coming through philanthropy, get support through mutual aid. So we did a lot of organizing around helping people buy food, do groceries. And so the co-op organizers were supporting, securing those resources. Like you mentioned how you were extending office hours. We did a similar thing. We mobilized as organizers and actually found ways to get food boxes, grant monies, supporting, connecting to things like Second Harvest. So many of the people in the city were just not working and they were getting funds. So we wanted to help them actually, like at the very least, eat. So the restaurant workers were really a critical part of that, and we were able to support them kind of getting mobilized with themselves and doing prepared foods to actually deliver to people in community. So mutual aid was really at the center of a lot of that organizing. And I want to just name that this isn't a new instance. This is something that has happened and has been a part of communities for centuries, but we really have to like turn an eye to it and really lift out the resonance of we have to return to mutual aid as a way to shifting the imbalance in our economy. And so that piece of like us connecting back to the mutual part really helped us see the light in moving forward with other people that wanted to take their restaurants or other like entertainment-based industries to a new sector and become worker-owned co-ops. So Pagoda Cafe is one example. There are a few other groups that were doing works in New Orleans that we supported and worked with them. We had a doula collective that was already there, and they were already in place supporting families, providing those essential services. And needless to say, the essential workers were really the people that really kept the town alive. And so us getting behind them and bringing whatever people, people were like, oh, we want to donate, we want to give money. Well, take those monies to the people that are actually doing the work in community. Don't take them to these larger institutions that are actually wanting to do other stuff with the money. Collectives like Birthmark were doing the work, so let's bring the resources to them and help them mobilize to meet family needs. Folks needed milk, diapers, things to that effect. So we supported directing those resources to people in community in that way. But at the center of it, what really resonated for us is that mutual aid was really the essential piece, and that we have to continue to use that as a way to look at creating new businesses. And so from there, we see that that's a path forward to people actually doing economic change. And so we're now looking at how can communities create centers so that folks can not only incubate new businesses, but also be a point where that mutual practice can be surfaced and supported. Pass it to you, Adrian.
So role as a cooperative organizer and how that shifted over the pandemic. So at the moment, my role as a cooperative organizer, as I see it, is really to start from the ground up, so educating the public on what a cooperative is and how it's possible, And then when teams get together and they're ready to start a cooperative, the approach is really, you know, what does it feel like to be an owner? I'll return to that. And so that goes into like, this is how facilitation can be done, and working one-on-one with folks and saying like, this is how you might facilitate, working with their kind of emotional blockages of being a facilitator or someone who's directing an organization. And so there's a lot of one-on-one check-ins as well as like group kind of conversations on how folks are doing or how dynamics might be blocking them from speaking their mind. So my role as a cooperative organizer is really like to empower folks to feel like this is possible, they can do this, and begin to cultivate that cooperative mindset so that when they bring on new members, they can kind of inoculate their members as they join. And then, you know, we can slowly just let that run on its own and have people, yeah, like for me, the cooperative is very important, but my interest is really in having people feel this different type of feeling, this kind of like, I don't want to say a rush, but there's this different feeling when you're like an owner and you're managing your life, you're directing your life. You can decide when you need to shift. You can decide when the dynamic needs to shift. You decide how the team moves. Like there's this different feeling that comes with that. And so like I like that spark to happen in folks and just kind of let that grow and grow so that they can keep sparking other people. So the shift from COVID, when COVID was happening, I was not a cooperative organizer. I was a community organizer in Berkeley, California. So we worked in Oakland, Berkeley, a little bit in San Francisco, but mostly the other side. Yeah, so I lived in an intentional community, which is where you live together, work together, study together under a unified vision. But there isn't structural, decentralized ownership, at least not in this intentional community. There's a hierarchy, and we were running in a democratic way. So let me see where to start. They brought me I was in the community, and then they tasked me with developing a program to bring on diverse youth folks to the community, which I think is an ongoing issue. I hear a lot of organizations looking to do the same thing. So as I was developing the program, some of the key elements that came up in the design were that folks need to be working in where they're passionate for it to really move on its own and grow. And where folks were passionate in that area, in that age range, was the just transition. It was social justice. That's where they wanted to focus. And so I was like, this is it. The other key element was they wanted respect and autonomy over their work. They wanted this feeling where someone wasn't telling them what to do or ripping something out from under them after they had worked on it so hard. And so I developed this program. Folks got together. The engines were revving. It went on for 2.5 years. And as COVID hit, these focuses started amplifying. We were organizing art projects on the street, working with emotional regulation for activists or advocates. And during this moment when we were kind of growing and really getting involved with the community, the organization decided that this was, and these are their words, that this was too political for the organization. we were moving in a direction that was a little too much for them. This was a religious institution, it's a Buddhist organization, and in Buddhism, it's very hierarchical, contrary to what you might think with Buddhism. It's actually a very hierarchical organization. And so our director and our group was very decentralized. It was working in this new way, but the grander community was not. And so they started catching wind of what we were doing, and they were not happy. And so there was this huge fight between us and them, and it ended with, if you don't stop, you have to leave. So this community that was built over 2 years and lives together was disbanded. And we all started, we had to move out. You know, I left California, others did as well, so everything just started dissolving. And it was horrible. Like, it's very difficult to be in that situation. Like, so the way my role shifted after that was that the real power had to be in the hands of the folks who are doing the work. Not just as a petri dish with a good-hearted director, but structurally we needed to be able to say, like, this is the direction we're moving. If, you know, you don't like it, like, this is what we're doing and we want to do this. And so I found my way to cooperatives after that as a more formal, like legal structure that we can have the actual power and not have that happen again. So resiliency of the organization. And economic power. We were all broke in that program and it sucked. So it was like, we need, you know, like, we need money to be able to feel better, take care of ourselves in a better way, be with family, pay our loans, you know, the regular stuff. So that is, yeah, I'll pause there.
You're gonna have to forgive me. I came from Arizona, so this room feels a bit like the Arctic for me. It is freezing. So I'm having a difficult time over here. This is a big question, and I've been debating about how to answer this question, and I think I'm also gonna preface my statement by saying that as a minority, I am tempted to code switch, right? There is how I am in my community, and then there is how I am in my professional sphere, and I'm trying to be more authentic and bring my whole self to these spaces. And so I'm always a little afraid that it's going to be a bit radical for people. So there's a number of things I want to say before I really delve in on this, and you're going to get to see a lot more of me than most people see in this space. And I feel really good about that because I've been in the nonprofit world, I've worked for universities, and I feel like the cooperative community is really welcoming in that and very encouraging. And I feel like this is this place to be and to stay. I've had an opportunity to go to some of the other sessions, and I thought, Alex, forgive me, I'm going to deviate very, very far from where we were. Often I walk into spaces and I am confronted with misconceptions about Indigenous communities. And let me be clear, I'm representing my community, my space, my family, and I cannot speak on behalf of, you know, anybody else. For the states, there are 575 federally recognized nations, and what that means for them is very different. I come from a warrior society. People think my name is cute. My name is Bijiba. It means the people join me in war. Our women are given war names. My daughter has a war name, and it's because we go into battle. So we have names that protect us. So with that, you know, when I say I was born into cooperation, the people join me in war was given to me with an expectation. And I suppose the context of this question, it's much broader. I live on a reservation. I was born on a reservation, and the more places I go, it's really starting to really set in for me what that means, to be able to go to other spaces and they have water rights where they can turn on a tap and they don't have to measure. I didn't expect to cry. How much water they're getting. Sorry, give me a moment. I heard earlier that there's a misconception that Indigenous peoples didn't understand or have perceptions of a land ownership, and that is not true. We did and we do understand land ownership, and I think it's important to really think about who that narrative benefits, right? Native peoples were removed from their homelands and they were put in concentration camps that we call reservations. My nation was lucky enough, Barbancito, Manilito, and Narbano negotiated for us to go back to our homelands, but it wasn't the entirety of our homelands. And so when we're talking about communities of resilience, we were put in places that the government thought were useless. And so you see extreme poverty in our communities because we were intentionally put in places that would prevent us from thriving. We remain there. And so it's important to understand when we're talking about climate, when we're talking about economic justice and restorative justice, that land back is a critical part of that conversation. And so the land acknowledgements are lovely, but they're meaningless. And in some ways, they're insulting. We need to work towards rematriation, and I encourage you all to take that into consideration and to trade in your land acknowledgements for treaty acknowledgements, because we are nations. We are native nations, we are sovereign nations, we have our own rights. And for my community in particular, we come from something that's called the Bennett Freeze. And if you've heard me speak before, you've probably heard me mention the Bennett Freeze. I don't know if anybody's familiar with it. Senator Bennett froze the land to development. And it was a ban that was put in place for 43 years. It was enforced by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and it was lifted in 2009. So during that period of time, we did not have any infrastructure developed for our community. So just to weigh in on what this really meant for our people, your window breaks, your door breaks, your roof is caving in, it is illegal for you to fix it. And this was enforced by the BIA agents. They would come and they would tell you, no, you don't get to do these things. So my community members, not by choice, live below the poverty line. And when I talk about that, when I look and think about them and going through this and trying to reflect on what I wanted to say, they were so proud that I was coming to this place. And I think of them as incredibly powerful and resilient because they live without running water and electricity and those basic human necessities. But that's not traditional. That's forced upon us. And they are resilient because they refuse to give up. The pandemic was an interesting space because the world was paying attention at that point. We were already living in distraught conditions. We ended up with the highest COVID rate in the country. And I can say that, but I'm sure some of you understand what that feels like. When the pandemic hit, we lost our most vital members of our community at that point, our medicine people, our elders, entire families were wiped out. And nobody came for us. Nobody had come for us. Nobody was going to come for us. And I think at the time, you know, when we're talking about forced assimilation tactics, part of that assimilation is into the Western economic system, right? And I was excited because I had been working in cooperative development, and it was finally this space where I didn't have to negotiate my culture away for $1. And I could bridge those pieces of my culture and my community together with prosperity. The pandemic opened up a space where we had no other choice. And I was really excited because, we have these concepts of kinship. We don't relate to each other by our names. We use our family systems. And Pascal, we were talking about this last night. I was so excited. We don't build community by saying, here's who I am, this is the institution that I work for. We introduce ourselves with our clan systems, and then we establish familial relationships. And then we treat each other accordingly. With the pandemic and with cooperative development, that was a huge backbone, and that was something that we leaned back on to for strength. And it was interesting to me to see, within the cooperative model, there's space for what would be called nepotism in the capitalist world. And so there was a lot of family building again. So I don't know if I can even take any credit for what already existed. It just made me more passionate about it. It made me more excited to share it with folks rather than feeling like I needed to keep it away and keep it hidden. And when I talk about those things, I am always scared that people are going to jump into those narratives that we've been told that Indigenous peoples are poor, or that they lack these different skills, or, I don't want you to see that. But that's a reality. That's part of a reality, but you got to think about the context in which it was brought to the forefront. And I'm going to stop there because I'm going to go on and on about this. It's going to come up multiple times, so thank you.
Should go on, yeah. I'm Bajiva. I'm from the Midwest, and I'm also struggling with this temperature in the room, so thank you for that. So my role as a cooperative organizer, I've been directing an initiative, the Madison Initiative, that's been funded by the city, for the past almost 6 years now. And so I see part of my role as really trying to spread out resources and information and knowledge. And one of the ways to spread resources is through the grants that we provide to groups who want to start cooperative, because at the end of the day, we still live in capitalism and we still need money for those business development supports. So to groups who want to start cooperatives, but also to community-based organizations who are fundamental to the work of starting cooperatives and these spaces where we can make change while also doing business. And another way that that my role as developer is just supporting people in whatever they want to do, whether that's through myself, through education, through technical assistance, or whether that's through my network, because, this work needs to be culturally and linguistically relevant, and that may not be me, right? So knowing the landscape of your community and the networks and the resources available is really important to share with people so that they get the support that they actually need and that's best for them. I loved what Paulina and some of the other folks who were in the panel on, what day is it? Tuesday, really talked about dreaming and giving the space, taking our space to dream in that time. And so I also feel part of my role is to support people in that dreaming, and then also being one of the supports in helping them think about what that could actually look like structurally, and then what they may need or who they may connect to move forward with those dreams to manifest them. During the pandemic, I think one negative aspect of it is, because so much of this work as a and I'm going to keep saying, cooperative organizer, is just in conversation with people and in connection with people. And, going out in your community, going to events or fundraisers or just, being out and about and having those conversations is where so much of this work is actually done, right? And I think that is one of the things that was hard or made, my work and the work of others in the community harder, is because we weren't having those interactions that mean so much every day, and that supports our work and people in their pursuit of cooperatives. But a couple of positive things, I think, is that people could slow down and have a little bit more time. And so they could, either dream more or pay more attention to the dreams that they already had. And also kind of be able to sit back and think more creatively about how to manifest those dreams. So I see my role as just like, just being one support in that movement. And I'll leave it at that because y'all have beautiful things to say.
Well, thank you all so much for sharing. When we had our Zoom call a few weeks ago, man, that is just something I belatedly wish I had recorded, because there was like so many amazing things that were said and ideas brought up. I did my best to record what I could, just writing it down. But Tama, one of the things you said was that when the system wasn't there to support us, we had to support ourselves. And I think that really does get to the heart of this panel. When the pandemic hit, it really just, it's cliche to say it at this point, right? But it revealed the cracks in the foundation. It showed all the systems that weren't working. It highlighted things that a lot of communities have already known, but it really laid bare for like really everyone to see in a way that they probably should have sooner. But cooperative organizers, I'll try to use organizer rather than developer for the rest of the panel, and cooperators really stepped in to fill the void. And when we were having these conversations just a few weeks ago, it was, I'll let you all get into it. I won't lead the horses to water too much, but just the topic of mutual aid and these kind of less like codified ways of cooperation came up. So I would love for you all to talk about how that happened in your community, both for the actual cooperative organizers, but really the role of cooperatives as well, and the people who were already involved in cooperatives, and how they helped fill the voids in the community. And we're actually going to start with Charity on this one.
So I'll start with some actual really tangible examples of what happened when the pandemic hit. So if we all remember, which seems like so long ago and also yesterday, when it first hit, we, even healthcare workers did not have face masks, or if they, the system did not provide what we needed to keep ourselves and other people safe. So, for example, Isthmus Engineering and Manufacturing Cooperative in Madison went right on the fly and manufactured face shields, and then for free distributed them to home care cooperatives across the country, and to local health clinics and hospitals if they wanted them. They also created these, manufactured these mask sanitizers, because if you remember, we had doctors and nurses assistants and everyone, staff in hospitals and clinics, who would wear the same mask for days because the system was not providing the safety that we needed. So they created these sanitizers, and again, gave them for free to anyone who would want them. This was a time when people couldn't leave their house, and he still needed medicine, right? Still needed their prescriptions. So we have Community Pharmacy, which is another worker-owned cooperative in Madison, which has a pharmacy. I just said that. Partner with Union Cab Cooperative to actually deliver medicines and necessities to people who couldn't leave their homes. So very P6, co-ops and co-ops supporting each other. We had restaurant folks, chefs, and restaurant owners come together to feed people. And in an industry where it's usually competitive, they're actually cooperating. And this actually led to a beautiful project called the Dane County Food Collective, where these same owners and chefs are coming together to recognize some of the problems in that restaurant industry and try to solve them collectively. So whether that's mental and physical health, whether that's addiction issues, so they do all these health classes, they address mental health, and again, this is an industry that often doesn't have health care, right? Access to health care. They're doing everything from doing peer training so that people can support each other, and to providing, what is the strips? The strips where people are overdosing on, yes, thank you. Doing all of that stuff. And they're looking at doing a purchasing co-op, which is one of the reasons I've been working with them. So again, in an industry that's competitive, they're coming together to cooperate. And I think, it's a form of mutual aid and a form of we have to do it ourselves and the system is not there. But it's really opening those spaces for people to cooperate and solve our own problems, yeah.
So I was not a cooperative organizer while COVID was happening. So I'm going to speak from a community organizer lens. What I saw was beneficial from a democratically run group, at least in a petri dish, was that we were able to move with the community needs. And so where we were in Berkeley, there was a lot of houseless folks. So when COVID was happening, it was very difficult for them, you can imagine. So there were a lot of mutual aid efforts that came just from each individual organizer in our program could respond to each of these efforts, and everyone had a different interest. Some people was food sovereignty, others was supporting houseless folks, other people were more on the supporting the other community organizers. This was a Buddhist intentional community, and so one of our big efforts as a group was to develop emotional resilience practices for advocates and activists in the area. So we would host classes and workshops on different practices drawn from Buddhism, but really transformed into a language that would land for folks in the community to begin to develop emotional resiliency, because the scene was very rough. We would go to marches and the police would be flashbang grenades, tear gas, threats, fights. It was very difficult to be there. So afterward, we would host different digesting sessions. We were very much in the care element of this. But we would also, the practices we developed were really around kind of drawing from the senses and the context of the situation to remain present in action. And how do you really feel present and connected with the environment so that you can be strong and be kind of reacting to your environment and make good decisions was a theme last night. So I think I'll keep it brief just so we could focus on cooperatives more, but the key element was really just in this democratically run group, we were able to react each individually in our personal interests, where we were more motivated and more informed to really develop mutual aid programs And the another key element was really like this kind of emotional support for organizers as a whole, you know, getting together and digesting and strategizing. So we really took that approach, and you know, it was helpful.
Yeah, this is a really good question, and I kind of started addressing some of this previously, and I want to just name resource mobilization and mutual aid are practices that have been embedded in communities of the global majority for eons. I want to give a shout out to Dr. Jessica Gordon-Nimhart for bringing to light the practices, the study, and the things that have happened in the Black communities here in the United States. And I also want to just offer a great deal of appreciation for a family here in Puerto Rico who has shared so many amazing stories of how they've done this work. And I just want to just lift out, it's been happening. People have been organizing in their communities and being cooperative in practice. It's not new. And I want to challenge the co-op development space to take a new look at what we consider development, and I'm liking the energy that we're creating here by saying we are co-op organizers. We are in position to do something different from the majority economy. Right now, a very small percentage of the world population is making decisions for the majority of the population. Just because it's not a part of the major economic platform, way communities have been meeting their needs is just as critical as what we say are in the larger economy. So mutual aid, resource mobilization are practices that are strategies that people have had no choice, right? Bajiba lifted this out. Black people in America post-Civil War had to get together in communities and find ways to create commissaries where they can actually have resources to feed themselves. I came from a family that's from a former mining town, and when the mine shut down, my family was forced out of the area that the commissary and the people were organizing. So we had to go into an area on the outskirt of where the mine infrastructure was developed. And so my family actually was a part of this town that was also at the foot of an old slave plantation. So really looking at these histories and stories, we were doing things to navigate and create ways for us to live and to exist. So I want to say that the pandemic, as I said earlier, lifted out what already existed. So in the co-op space, we can actually do something different, right? We cannot replicate what the global economic decision makers are actually doing. We can do something different by saying your practice in your community is just as cooperative as some of these other quote unquote, you know, we may look at co-ops in a box, but I think co-ops are out of the box. We should not like put this structure on what defines a cooperative and give people the liberty and the freedom to actually name what it is that they do and be cooperative. If they meet the essence of what these principles, which I want to say these principles are resonating in old ancient spiritual practices, right? Many of us who are connected to our ancestry and who we are as a people, these practices are a part of the ways we operate anyway. And so the co-op model should not be boxed into, it needs to look like this, it needs to look like this. Communities across the globe have been doing what it takes to be economic, you know, to help meet economic needs regardless. And when we look at this word economy, I just want to break this down. This is a Latin word that means household management. When did it become somebody's bottom line? When did that happen? Who made that shift for us? And so, you know, it's hard for me to just stick in the space of when the pandemic, because this is what has existed since my people have been in this land, right? Since Bajiba's people had this land taken from them, right? So we've had to really shift to try to fit into someone else's box to be a business, right? You gotta have a pro forma, you gotta have this, da-da-da-da-da, all these things. And I'm not saying that you can't have a successful business model with proper capital. What I'm saying is there needs to be a shift in what we look at and identify as cooperative practices. So I'm issuing a challenge for people who consider themselves as a co-op developer. The pandemic lifted this out, but if you're a co-op developer, don't just box in what people are doing. They've been cooperating for ages. We just need to shift how we're navigating and pulling resources to support what folks have been doing already. The mutual aid organizing and the resource mobilization is just a small piece of the puzzle. People were well equipped with mask making. They were well equipped with finding the ways to clean and keep things safe so that we weren't getting sick. You know, I lost a lot of people in my family because of the pandemic, and that was because we didn't have the resources to do some of the things that we needed to do to meet our needs, right? So this is a challenge for us. If we have access to resources in this space, how do we redirect them to the people who have been doing this already? Don't box in. Don't put a framework on what people have been doing. Give them what they need to do what they do and actually claim it as a cooperative practice because it's there. You don't have to redefine this. It's already there. So I like Bajiba. I'm getting a little emotional because I'm really passionate about lifting out the stories and the histories that I lived, right? I'm from a former my family is from this town of coal mining. All my aunts and uncles helped raise me. All my cousins and I worked together. At 14, my cousins and I got together and did a social and savings club, right? And we didn't even know what we were doing. We just did it because it was a part of who we were. We knew we wanted to go to the mall on the weekends and do what we saw other kids doing. And so we would go sell candy, and we would put that money in a pot, and then we'd go and buy school clothes for our siblings and help each other. These are practices that have been here. The pandemic just really highlighted it. It put a Sharpie highlighter on it and said, hey, y'all, people in community can't meet their needs because somebody's isolating the resources. Well, we need to let go of the resources and give people what they need. And the co-op space has an opportunity to not replicate the harms that the major economy has done, the majority of people who are in the economy has done. We can relabel what economy is back to giving people the power to meet their needs inside their homes and in their communities and with the people they are in neighborhood with, et cetera. So I really want to just name that is a big piece of the puzzle and just to challenge us. And again, calling ourselves co-op organizers puts human back into it. You're not developing a doggone building. You're giving people the power to do what they need to do, to eat, to live, to wake up every day and feel like I'm not stuck in this rat race. When did we let this happen to us? We have to change it. We have to shift it. And the pandemic was just one of the many things that has happened to really highlight the injustice, the imbalance. Why is there only a small percentage of the world population making decisions for all of you? That's not right. So this governance, coming together to meet needs, is co-op spaces facilitate that, they nurture that. This is something that we can actually help do and shift power for people across the globe. So, that's.
What Tomas said. So. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I think on that note, I think there's something that ends up happening in the cooperative community. And I will say, when I jumped into the community, I came in with a wealth of information and a wealth of knowledge that I was raised in about cooperative development. And then being introduced to cooperative development on a professional level with this institutional training. I got the typical Co-op 101, and here's the Rochdale Society, and here are the 7 principles. And in a lot of ways I saw, oh, there's a lot of compatibility, but I also saw a lot of assimilationist tactics. And I don't think we talk a lot about the assimilationist aspect of cooperative development. I think there's typically this conversation like, co-ops are the end-all, be-all, cure-all, and they're just wonderful in all of their forms. And I want to remind people that co-ops are a tool. They're a tool like any other. And you have to be very conscious about how you're utilizing that tool, who has access to that tool, and what model are you expanding on. And I love co-ops because they are, they're a fireball. Once they get going, they're gone, and there's no stopping them. And you really got to think about, well, what direction are we moving in? I think there's still a challenge because folks are so used to Western capitalism, stepping away from the end goal being these perceptions of what wealth is, what prosperity is. And typically people get wrapped up into this, oh, prosperity and wealth is this mutual majority where we all have access to this Western capitalist model of of what it means to be wealthy. And for my community, we come from a subsistence economy, and for us, having wealth is knowledge. It's our knowledge keepers. They're incredibly wealthy people in our community. For my family, it's our horses. It's our livestock. So we do have co-ops, and that was part of the challenge was, well, expanding the definition of what a co-op is, because it didn't necessarily apply to us in its typical form, in its Co-op 101 form. So we define co-ops as long as it has those 3 principles, it's something that we can move forward with. We have cooperatives that are, instead of using the dollar, they're using sheep units. And that's really exciting for me. We're reopening trade systems with our cooperatives. We're going back to our traditional trades amongst different nations. So, Hopi Food Cooperative is more than willing to exchange goods with surrounding areas. It's interesting to me to see, though, that there is space in the co-op community for that, and I am thankful. I am absolutely thankful for that. And I'm going to say that I've never seen so much support in Indigenous cooperative development than I do in the cooperative community. So, on there.
Thanks to you all. This next question is for Tama and Bijiba, although other folks can feel welcome to jump in. And it goes back to the conversation that we were having a few weeks ago, and it's actually already come up a couple of times here. Bijiba, you opened by saying that you often find yourself like code switching in different environments. And on the call a couple of weeks, and you just also talked about, if you're not intentional or, that co-ops can be used as a tool of like assimilation and have like violent impacts in that regard. But on our call a couple weeks ago, there was also the conversation of co-ops promoting resiliency, like cultural resiliency. So we usually talk about it in terms of like businesses saved, jobs saved, but then there came up this idea of like, oh, well, there are also co-ops in my community where like code switching isn't necessary. So I'm hoping that the two of you can maybe speak to what sort of cultural resiliency has been possible with co-ops and cooperative practices in your communities.
Yeah, so I already shared that I'm in New Orleans, and culture is a big part of being in that space. Music, arts, food, but really what has been a big piece of the puzzle there in particular is the extraction of those things for someone else's benefit. And we're currently working with a group right now in New Orleans. They're masking Indians, or the Mardi Gras Indians. Some may know of them and seen them. They have cultural practice that are aligned with indigenous population. I think what happened there, and I can't tell their stories, but just to share a little bit about what I know, is that in Louisiana, there were people that were working together, the native people of the land post-slavery, as well as the formerly enslaved people. They worked together to build these alliances and allegiances with each other. And really, there was a lot of support from indigenous communities to support formerly enslaved people to seek freedom. And so from this, these beautiful relationships around arts and culture manifested. And that was also a very cooperative essence and collective practice being shared by our peoples. And what from that, this art form that happens now, we see the masking in honor of their ancestors that build these alliances. Well, during the pandemic, the people who mask weren't able to do what they needed to do. They normally mask around Mardi Gras time. They normally mask around different events. We created events around Lent, et cetera. And I won't go too deeply into that, but ways that folks have been doing this work, they share in the practice of the needlework, the beading, and the threading. And it creates this beautiful manifestations of these art pieces that are so amazing. And so we're working with a group of masking Indians right now to help them create an art supply co-op. Even in that art celebration of that art form and the celebration of those histories, what is happening is they still have to go outside of the even local to gain access to the resources that they need to do the work. And it's expensive. And others that know that they do that are charging a lot of money for these resources. So what would it look like for them to own those feathers, for them to own the beads or create the beads to keep this economy right within into the local economy? And so we're working with a group, they call it Keep It in the Culture. They are a new cooperative, and I want to thank Mary, who's working with them in an academy to actually help them build a cooperative where they have an art supply co-op. So I just I shared that because that's one of the things that has happened from an economic standpoint. But for you to be able to not have to code switch and go into a corporate office and not name that I'm a masking Indian, and me, I'm a practicing Hebrew. I can come in with my head wrap and be okay with what I am as a co-op organizer. We're recoining this phrase, this phrase is co-op organizer, to be able to be in space and be in my full culture and not be ashamed of who I am and not be ashamed of my culture, and them being able to lift out their culture as a way of who we are, I think is really important. And a lot of times we often see where folks have to go get jobs to support it. And we really want them to be able to, this is what we do. We live in this part of our ways. And to be able to make money and to actually meet our needs is I think, the big piece of the puzzle. And not have to be in this space where you're, told what to do. Your hopes and your dreams are crushed because you have to be something different than what you are. I think it's important. And co-ops create space for that. For them to be able to own their business, their own art supply cooperative, I think is a really true aspiration for them, but also for me too, because we often get extracted upon. All of the resources that usually go into creating those suits, most of them don't get paid for that. They don't get paid for that. They mask on faith. They go out because it's a part of who they are. This is a part of, I'm celebrating myself as a person. And so I have to go find other ways to meet my needs. So what would it look like if they own all the resources around creating that art piece? And another piece of extraction that happens is, and this is some work that I did years ago before I claimed the work of being a co-op organizer, was the right of publicity. See, right now, they end up getting these beautiful, amazing art pieces, and people come into the community, they're taking photos, they're taking all these pieces, and they're selling it as art. They're selling this as art, and they didn't create any of it. So cooperatives can provide space where the artists, the photographers, the people are working together to create art and monetizing that, to bring those resources, whether it's money, whether it's other resources to do the suits, back to the people that own them. So there's this piece around how cooperatives can actually restore people back to being in their culture and meeting their needs at the same time. So I'll stop there because, Bajiba, I know you have so much to share about this.
I don't know what aspect doesn't touch culture for us, cultural preservation for us. It all does. All of the co-ops that we work in some way or another, Koala Arts and Crafts Cooperative, I don't know if you're familiar with them. They do a lot of conservation work with their cooperative. And there's this one story that keeps popping up in my head, and I wish Candace Kwam were here to tell it. With Arts Cooperative, Ancestral Rich Treasures of Zuni Co-op out of Zuni Pueblo. She's a fireball. If you've ever had a chance to talk to Candace, she's wonderful. But she tells this story about when she became a member of her cooperative as an artist. And she had been talking about, well, I was an artist trying to figure out how to do these things, how to market, how to access the tools, how to go about the techniques. And, you know, these were things that were part of my culture and my tradition. And within a capitalist model, it was really competitive. And so people don't share. They don't want to share. It's this secret that there's a safeguarding that happens. But within her cooperative, there was this communal space where people are saying, come here. And I'm going to show you, come sit with me. Here's my tool. Let me show you how I did this, you know, and it's about improving prosperity for the group. And when she tells that story, she lights up. And it really points to, for me, the role that cooperatives play in nurturing our traditional communities. And the role that art, it's not just art, it's about our relationship and our understanding of the world. So much of our stories, our designs, go into those pieces, and they're powerful, they're meaningful for us. They're used in our ceremonies, and so it's just not, you know, paint by number. It's powerful. One thing that keeps popping up too when we're talking about, we call it peacemaking in our community. We really focus on restorative justice systems rather than punitive ones. And one of the things that we've been able to work into the co-ops that we work with are our peacemaking strategies. So when we do our member agreements, we also bring in aspects of our peacemaking so that we understand how to relate with one another. But that's also something that's deeply embedded in our culture, in our community. I already mentioned the sheep units, being able to go back and as a pastoral society that relies on our subsistence economies, you know, to reincorporate that. But I always get stuck up on this one piece where I feel like I'm plugging my culture into this co-op movement, which is really exciting, but at the same time, I think eventually we're just gonna swallow up the co-op movement into indigenous communities. I think that's the end-all goal, so.
Well, I do have one more question, but I know we're also coming up to the end of the session, and I want to leave some space for audience members to ask any lingering questions. So maybe if we can just briefly get into this last piece. We got into this idea of cooperatives and their importance in teaching resiliency skills, which you just brought up with the peacemaking. Adrian, you mentioned like meditation and like kind of that element for community organizers earlier. So I do want to leave a little bit of space for audience questions, but maybe if you can just briefly touch on some resiliency skills that cooperative organizers and cooperatives have helped build in your communities. And let's start with Charity and come back this way.
Yeah, thank you for all of that. It's really hard to follow up what Toma and Bijiba said, and I'm grateful to be here to hear it. So resiliency skills, I mean, going back, especially what Toma said about people just helping each other and doing what they've been doing forever, but I think the pandemic and being able to slow down gave not all people, right, let's be real, the space to do that and make more energy for that and to do that more intentionally. And yeah, the space, I mean, even more space to connect with nature for many people, right? Slowing down, dreaming, connecting with nature. And I'll just leave with one co-op example that I think that I worked with, that was started during the pandemic, that I think is a good representation of this resiliency question. So Madison Cycle works as a cooperative that does delivery by bike all year round in the Midwest, remember, and also does mobile bike repair. So they'll come to where you are and fix your bike. So I think this is a great example of resiliency in that, economic sense of good jobs, people doing what they like to do, that freedom to do what they actually would prefer to do every day, but also going back to the theme of this conference of climate resiliency, right? How do we figure out ways to meet our needs that are friendlier and more climate resilient? So I'll just stop there. Thank you.
I feel like these are cheater questions because it's just co-ops embody that, right? Don't they? Resilience, because they work from the community at its most fundamental level. So you inevitably have co-ops that are being developed to meet the immediate needs of the community. I'm going to give a shout out right now to Navajo Power, LLC back home. Brett Isaac is this, he's a good friend of mine, but he was raised in Shanto on the Navajo reservation, and he started off making residential solar systems, like piecing these things together for people who had never had power before. And he inevitably grew this company that he created into a multi-million-dollar solar development project. And now he's starting a solar cooperative with people on the Navajo Nation. So it's going to be owned by Navajo people. And for people who have never had electricity, I can't tell you what it's like turning on your lights or plugging in a refrigerator that's housing your medication, like how monumental it is. And my community, they're resistors. We've resisted to preserve our lands. They wanted to remove us. They wanted to assimilate us. And to have power where I am now, if you call me on a Zoom meeting, you're going to see me in my great-grandfather's hogan with my solar system that's been put in place by Brett Isaac, and my satellite, and the kids in the community now have a 3D printer in the middle of nowhere. I was talking about this at the solar tour we did the other day, that these kids are making their own toys in the middle of nowhere because they finally got internet with that power and figured it out, like what does that bring, that level of innovation? And that's with a co-op. That's the co-op that's doing that. Food access for folks who are living without, we have 13 grocery stores across our entire nation. I always point out that none of the meat or the produce inside of those grocery stores are from the community, which is just blows my mind. But with a grocery cooperative, that's a place for us to put back nutrition into our communities. Yeah, all of it. All of it? Can I say that?
So I think we have about 2 minutes for audience questions. You want to answer? Okay.
Let's do audience questions.
Are there any questions from the audience? If not, yeah? Or, okay. Yeah, in the back.
Yeah, me too.
And say absolutely, and I think that's something that I forgot to mention during the pandemic when it was like, oh, what are we gonna do? We're waiting for these outside resources, right? What we did instead is we went around the community and we started to identify, well, what do we already have? And then we were able to champion our communities and say, okay, well, we're in abundance. We live in an abundance with our community members, and now we have somewhere to go. And, you know, that was exciting.
Other questions? Sorry. There you go. Are there any other questions that folks have? Yeah. Oh, sorry, I didn't.
I just wanted to say this has been a fantastic discussion. Thank you all so much.
But I do have a question. So my question is, so pulling back on what Jamal was saying, and maybe this is a question more for the moderators. So Jamal said, I was, Mabry in West Virginia is working with one of the tribes in New Orleans. There's a gap there, right? Like, how can the organizations represented up here that provide cooperative development support tap in more? In what ways can they tap in more to add more capacity to being able to help and develop these things? Because in no world should somebody from West Virginia be a necessary resource for somebody in Louisiana when I know that there are significant resources that are coming into some of these cooperative development organizations. And how am I finding a way to do that with nothing?
I do want to address this because this is back to what the challenge I issued. Resource mobilization is a really big piece, and those who have access to resources, I'm presenting again this challenge. If you have resources, right, you're connected to these resources. Do know that people in places and spaces, like Mabry said, he's doing the work. I'm doing the work, but unfortunately, we're stretched thin, right? And so the space that we're occupying now is that co-op development looks a certain way, but it doesn't look like the people who need the support. And so we're in space now where we're changing what co-op development or co-op organizing is, and we're positioned now to train up and also bring culturally relevant education and training and resources to those folks who are already doing the work. Empower the people that already know, that are already boots on the ground in community, and I just want to lift out the idea of resistance, a question you kind of lifted earlier about resilience. Well, I want to throw in resistance because we're in Black August right now, and I'm just lifting out that spirit of resistance and naming that we have to do this deep sense of unlearning from not just the people who are in communities of the global majority, but people who are in spaces that hold power. You gotta unlearn some of the things and the practices and the ways that you subscribe to as being a member of the quote unquote people in power. You gotta do the unlearning. okay? We've been doing the work. You need to change your ways. And I'm not pointing the finger at one person, I'm just challenging the spectrum. You have to do some work and start reflecting on what it looks like to organize cooperatives, and then you can begin to redirect resources into ways that are going to make a huger impact.
So that's fantastic. So I'm going to ask one sort of moderator prerogative, one question, and I think we're over time, so I'm going to do this question, then I think we need to cut it off, and then people can come up front, and we'll see when the next sessions are actually starting. But obviously, things are running behind. But I was curious. I think this might be a question for Alex, but also for others. If we are doing co-op development or co-op organizing with this kind of decolonization, to use a word, lens, what changes need to happen? This is a co-op education conference, so how do we need to be training co-op organizers differently?
That's a question that I have been wrestling with, and frankly, I think I need to have more conversations and listen to these folks. CW does do a training for newer cooperative developers, and it's a really excellent training, but I think that there's a lot of pieces that have been discussed here that need to be incorporated into that. So I would put this out as hopefully stepping up to your challenge, and also an invitation to folks in this room, if you want to have conversations about that with me or any of the folks who are part of CW. Yeah, I'm very open to that. I think that's something we're working on right now.
I'll keep it short. We have a project in New Orleans called Cooperation Gumbo. And part of this project is to really lift out ways cooperative practices have existed in communities for a while. And it's about storytelling. So I think part of it is co-op organizers need to go into community and learn from them, to learn how organizing has happened in those communities. Let's start there. And there's so many stories in collective courage around how co-op organizing has actually happened. So cutting it off, not to ramble because I know we're over time, but go into community and learn from the communities because they've been doing this already.
Just to add to that, I work with a lot of steering committees, and they put in so much time and effort. And so going off of that, going into the community and learning from them, there are very little funds that can go to the actual steering committee members. There's a lot of funding for cooperative organizers and developers, small business technical assistance, but for the steering committee members or the community to be doing that work that the organizers need their help with. Like, I need to spend time with this community for it to develop and for us to learn what this actually looks like in each different place. They need funds to support themselves as well. And there are so few funds, some loopholes to get money out there, but I think that's one way that the cooperative movement can change, is really getting funds for the folks who we're learning from, who are educating us and taking the time to develop these processes.
I don't know if anyone, Jiva or Charity, if you want to say anything. If not,
I am, how do I answer this question? It's a big question, this decolonization. You know, we're still trying to sort that out ourselves and what that means. We did a training. Did I lose it? We did a training. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Pamela Standing. She is a trailblazer. I love Pamela. It's bringing groups together groups of Native peoples together to train cohorts in Indigenous cooperative development. So we're doing Train the Trainers, and it's all about, putting together strategies for our own communities. Part of the challenge that I have as an organizer who's pushing the co-op model is oftentimes my community will say, well, we already do that. We don't call it co-ops, but we can call it a co-op. And I think often it's about bringing right, sharing of resources to the table and saying, what's always really exciting is we have an abundance of resources in the cooperative ecosystem. And for Indigenous communities, in my community, it's always like, I don't have to change anything, just as we are. That's okay. We don't need to fit it into something. We don't need to take pieces out. And there's an awareness that needs to be built. And I think not necessarily for, education, communication. I'm going to say it really needs to start there. There's not enough communication there. And there's often this otherizing of, well, I don't work in a Native community. I don't know any Native communities. They have theirs and we have ours. And we really need to start just coming to the table and having a discussion.
Okay, Charity, no, you're passing, great. Okay, well, let's give a hand to this amazing panel.